How old are you?
I'm 10 years.
10 years old.
Yes.
Do you know why Biafra is fighting?
Biafra is fighting for survival.
Is it going to win?
Yes, sir.
You were conscripted into the Biafran army at 15?
It's not uncommon. In many conflict zones, many kids, children are conscripted.
They had to fight at the front where so many of our young men have died. We have become, most of us, refugees. We have lost our property. We have nothing of our own.
They need men, they need soldiers to open the front.
What did that mean for you as a 15-year-old being involved in the war at such a level?
Because I was in high school already, I can write and read. I was trained and then sent to work in the quartermaster, which is logistics.
And how did that experience shape you?
The war did affect me because when Port Harcourt fell, we became refugees. I walked from Port Harcourt to Owerri.
By foot?
With my father, both of us walked physically from Port Harcourt to Owerri. We were running for our lives, sometimes in the jungle, non-stop. I took over, I don't know how many hours. There were so many wounded soldiers, and there was not enough medication, antibiotics, or blood supplies to treat them. And the poor doctors have to decide who gets treated and who dies. And as a teenager, when you see that, it's so painful that you said, I'll never be in a position where I decide who will die, who will live. At that point, I said, no, I'll never study medicine, if this is what medicine involves.
This is the A-Force Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.
I couldn't interview Albert Einstein or Thomas Edison, so God sent me one better. A force of engineering, Dr. Cyprian Emeka Uzoh is one of the brains behind the semiconductor technology that powers your phone, your laptop, your internet. You know Einstein, you know Edison, but not Uzoh. Let's fix that.
The A-Force Podcast continues now.
Welcome to the A-Force Podcast. A is for Africa. We celebrate immigrants shaping the global workforce and document the history of modern African excellence. To understand why I just compared our guests to Einstein and Edison, you have to look at the massive industrial footprints he's leaving across the globe. So before we bring in our guest, let me break down why Dr. Uzoh is a force of the modern world. Before Dr. Uzoh's breakthroughs in the 90s, all computer chips were wired with aluminum. As chips got smaller and faster, aluminum began to fail. It would overheat and suffer from something called electromigration, meaning the wires would thin out and break. The industry was stuck. They couldn't make computers any faster because the pipes, the aluminum, just couldn't handle the flow. Now, copper conducts electricity much better than aluminum, but if you put copper on the chip, the copper would diffuse into the silicon, kill the transistor, computers dead. In fact, before the breakthroughs of Dr. Uzoh and his team, copper was famously nicknamed the poison or killer of semiconductors. So here's where Dr. Uzoh came in. In 1997, he developed the electroplating process for copper. He created the recipe for barrier layers that basically prevents copper from leaking into silicon. The recipe worked. This meal was delicious, Michelin stars, and he paved the way for copper wiring, which led to technological breakthroughs in the modern world. To explain Dr. Cyprian Uzoh's impact in 2026, here are practical ways you and I benefit from his pioneering copper wiring and electroplating technology. Every phone today uses Dr. Uzoh's copper recipe for the billions of internal connections that make your phone super fast. Your laptops are thin and light, your apps open instantly, your computer runs 15 to 30% faster, your smartwatches work because the tiny processors inside rely on Dr. Uzoh's copper interconnects to fit into such small, tiny spaces. So I can go on and on. Your electric cars, your 8K TVs, your VPNs, your smooth video calls, this thing we're doing here, the podcast, the video, the fantastic camera, right? Your Bluetooth headphones, airplane navigation, DNA sequencing, the massive data centers that power the internet and AI, all thanks to the pioneering mind of one Nigerian immigrant. Dr. Cyprian Emeka Uzoh, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you for bringing me on. Please stop comparing me to Edison and Einstein. I'm just regular Emeka Uzoh from Nigeria and US.
That's another thing you have to know about Dr. Emeka Uzoh. He is the most modest and the most humble man you would ever meet. But when I look at the evidence of the over 350 patents you have in the US, when I look at your research, the evidence, it just feels like an objective fact. But before we dive into that incredible journey, I want to break the ice with our culture swap game. So basically, I'll give you 5 quick questions, something from Nigeria and something from America. Just tell me which one you prefer and why. A bowl of pounded yam and egusi soup or a slice of pizza?
Of course, yam and egusi, no comparison.
A 90-degree day in Onitsha or a minus 20-degree blizzard in Madison?
I can live with both. I've lived with both.
But you have to pick one?
Onitsha, of course.
Onitsha, okay. So navigating a Lagos Danfo bus or riding in a driverless car?
Oh, driverless car, no comparison. Come on.
Nigerian Christmas rice or Thanksgiving turkey?
Oh, Nigerian Christmas.
A strict Nigerian school principal or a flexible American professor?
Flexible American professor.
All right. So, Dr. Uzoh, I want us to start from the beginning. You're from Ojoto, born in Ogidi, Anambra State, Southeast Nigeria in 1952. Your father was a principal accountant, a civil servant working in the Treasury Department. And because of your dad's job, he was, frequently transferred to different states across the country. This means you attended school in Oyo State, Ogun State, Anambra, and Enugu. And at 15, the Nigerian Civil War broke out, 1967. That's when you should have been spending your prime teenage years, but it ended up being in a conflict that didn't end until you were 18. So can you take us back to your early childhood days, your early teenage years, before and after the war? What do you remember from the Nigerian Civil War, and how did that experience shape you?
Going back to the beginning, yes, you're correct. I went to school in Ibadan. And then Shagamu, then, of course, went to high school at Christ the King College, Onitsha. The war did affect me because my father was a senior police officer at Port Harcourt. When Port Harcourt fell, we became refugees. So we ran back to Ojo, to my father's hometown. And along the way, after a while, I was basically recruited or conscripted into the Biafran Army. And I was in the army till the war ended in 1970, then went back to school. The army did change my life significantly because all along I wanted to study medicine. And basically, my life I wanted to become a medical doctor. But because of the suffering and what I saw in the war, I felt like this is not for me. And basically, I decided to study something else. So the war did affect my choice of career. And of course, when I decided to study metallurgy, aeronautical engineering, I don't know what it means. I've not met a metallurgist in my life or somebody with background in aeronautical engineering. And so the rest is history.
You mentioned something really striking. You were conscripted into the Biafran army at 15?
Yes, it's not uncommon. In many conflict zones, many kids, children are conscripted. They need men, they need soldiers to work in the front. So
What did that mean for you as a 15-year-old being involved in the war at such a level?
Because I was in high school already, I can write and read. I was trained and then sent to work in the quartermaster, which is logistics. So I was in logistics throughout, supporting the war efforts, as opposed to being in combat, providing troop comfort, things like food, uniform, boots. Those basically who support the troops, all the troop effort. How their munitions are managed, moving to different locations, They have to be fed, soldiers have to be fed, correct? So someone have to arrange how the foods have to be cooked, and how the foods are supplied, procurement and delivery. Basically, whatever it takes to keep the war going, it's part of logistics. Without that, you can have no war. The soldiers have to be fed. They have to be clothed, correct? So there are people working behind the scene to make that happen.
Was this something you were forced to do and you had no choice?
We don't have a choice. Remember, we have to defend ourselves, and everyone was imploding, so I don't have a choice. I'm not the only one conscripted. A lot of young men were conscripted on both sides.
And you did that throughout the 3 years?
Yeah, 23 years.
Oh my gosh.
When they started shelling Port Harcourt, I worked with my father. We walked from Port Harcourt to Owerri.
By foot?
With my father, both of us worked physically from Port Harcourt to Owerri. We were running for our lives, sometimes in the jungle, non-stop. I took over, I don't know how many hours. So when we got to Owerri, we got into a family friend's car because everything was abandoned. Then we drove straight to Joto. So you can imagine walking over 40 miles non-stop for your life. Not everybody made it, but we're one of the fortunate ones who survived all the bombing and strafing. So it does, as a young man, it changed my perspective on what is important and what's not important.
I understand this is a very touchy subject for lots of Nigerians, and it really shocks me knowing that it affected you in that way and you were involved on that level. I'm really sorry about that.
It affected me because there were so many wounded soldiers and there was not enough medication, antibiotics or blood supplies to treat them. And the poor doctors have to decide who gets treated and who dies. And as a teenager, when you see that, it's so painful that I'll never be in a position where I decide who will die, who will live. At that point, I said, no, I'll never study medicine if this is what medicine involves. It happened in the US too during the COVID crisis, correct? There were not enough medication, and doctors have to make similar decisions who gets treated, who doesn't get treated. We experience that, especially in the US and many Western, even in Nigeria too, correct? Who gets oxygen, who doesn't get oxygen? The same situation.
You just didn't want to bear the burden of that decision. So you decided, I wash my hands off medicine.
Sure.
You got that government scholarship. You arrived in the US in the 1970s to study metallurgical engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Went on to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Arriving America, what were some of your biggest culture shocks in 1975?
I arrived in January 2nd, 1975. Madison. I've never seen snow before, so I don't even know what snow looks like. And I came with sneakers and jeans and a giant sweater. We have over 3 or 4 feet of snow on the ground. It was more difficult because when I arrived on campus was closed. I thought if I come in earlier, I'll adapt to the environment. Everywhere was closed, all the dormitories. So the foreign student office was not even open. When this poor driver drove me all over the whole place, at the end, he dropped me at YMCA. I have a small hostel that's reasonably cheap. So I stayed in the hostel till school opens and then moved into a dormitory. But I did adjust over time. If you dress very well and you're careful, you do well. Also, I met fantastic people who did help me adjust to the new environment.
You graduated school early and attended Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York, right? And then you got a job at IBM TJ Watson Research Center, funded by NASA and the Air Force. Getting the US government, NASA and the Air Force to pay for your PhD research at a top tier school like RPI is a massive achievement on its own. Now, the question is, how does a young man from Nigeria, just a few years out of a civil war, end up in a lab in New York with NASA and the Air Force footing the bill?
This is part of the greatness of America, that you could see a promising young man decide to invest in him. So my entire 6 years in graduate school is free. That's a U.S. investment in me. As a result of that investment, I was hired by one of the top labs in the world, TJ Watson, in 1985, to do fundamental research on X-ray systems, chips, interconnects, among other areas.
You spent your postgraduate years doing this high-level research, right? And when you graduated, you wanted to work for NASA. But then you hit a wall. They told you they couldn't hire you because you weren't yet a U.S. citizen. How did it feel to know that NASA was happy to fund your research while you were a student, but they couldn't offer you a job because of your passport? Can you walk me through that immigration bottleneck that you went through at the time?
Actually, it's not just NASA. I was hoping to work for Boeing or Sikorsky or General Dynamics, all the helicopter companies. My passion was, to design helicopter, work on airplane fabrication, but you have to be a U.S. citizen. It is the law. And it's difficult to get around. So I wrote several applications. The issue kept coming up. But when I interviewed, IBM came to Rensselaer to recruit, and I told the recruiter, I'm not a citizen. Now we look at me, I said, we employ people from all over the world, including Russia, South Africa, Brazil. And then she took my application. A few days later, I was invited for interview on Thursday, and then on Friday, I was offered a job. And then I started about a month later.
Dr. Uzoh, there's a moment in your story that felt a bit bittersweet, right? You spent years at Wisconsin and RPI mastering advanced composite materials for aircraft. You said it. You wanted to work at Boeing and NASA, these big aviation companies, but because of that citizenship barrier, right, you had to make a massive pivot. Joined IBM 1985, 10 years before I was born, by the way. IBM sponsored your H-1B, and then you switched. You started doing research in semiconductors and microchips fabrication, something you hadn't even studied in school. Basically, you had to leave your original passion and start over in a field that was completely foreign to you. How did you manage to take the principles of this large-scale aviation, materials and apply them to the world of, microchips?
The key issue was when I was at Madison, I had great fundamentals also at Rensselaer. It is the fundamentals that actually mattered. Even though I did not take a single course in semiconductor, device physics, chemistry, manufacturing, because of the fundamentals in material science and physics, I was able to find my way around my major limitations. But it required that I have to work very long hours. Sometimes I worked till 3 o'clock in the morning in the lab. And because I worked very hard, long enough, I made many, many fundamental discoveries which were not obvious. And also because I come with a different lens. I look at things slightly differently compared to others. It became a very big advantage.
That's amazing. You turned that disappointment into a new expertise, right? To the outside world, it looked like, this was the ultimate success. But in our pre-interview, you said that your ideas at IBM was not acknowledged for about 10 years. You were this brilliant mind, but you felt frustrated because, as you said, your colleagues were looking down on your concepts. Do you think they simply couldn't understand your vision? Or was it like a deeper bias against, like you told me in 2018, this bold young Nigerian scientist? They've never seen a black man do these things before. You were challenging the status quo. Do you think it was that?
It's difficult to tell why I was not taking that seriously. But at the end, what matters was the technology that I developed became the foundation of modern chip, high-performance interconnect.
And you mentioned that in the early 90s, IBM had massive layoffs. And coincidentally, many of the people who didn't acknowledge your work, who didn't acknowledge your ideas, they, retired or they left. Basically, the old guard was gone, and suddenly a new group of leaders saw your work. And you specifically mentioned a colleague who saw your notebooks where you had been documenting your ideas for years. And they finally realized that your copper interconnect wasn't just a theory. It was literally the holy grail solution that the industry had been looking for 30 years. How did it feel to go from being ignored to being acknowledged?
He just looked over my note and said, these are great industrial problems. Because sometimes if you come out with a solution, you don't actually know it's a solution until somebody acknowledges, wow, you've done something very difficult. It was that acknowledgement that made me stronger, that, I said, okay. Then basically I worked a lot harder. And luckily, the new committee were very, very receptive to my ideas and said, well, they're worth protecting. And they started filing patents to protect those concepts.
Wow. You said something really important. You said, if you come up with a solution, sometimes you don't even know it's a solution until someone acknowledges it. So there's that important place of maybe mentorship, in anyone's career. While everyone else was looking at this problem and seeing a dead end, what made you see this problem differently, to see a solution, even though you didn't know it was a solution at the time?
When I was assigned that project, I was assigned to another sister group. We both worked together in collaboration. But along the way, I gained more independence and established my own process. It is in this my own process I became a lot more open and look at all type of parameters. Instead of 20 different parameters to look at, I narrowed it down to 8 or 9. And along the way, I found a solution. But it's a very large group. It's very collaborative. So when I solved that issue, we all share the credit.
Dr. Uzoh, I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that really stuns me about you is just your level of humility and modesty. And I'm really happy this platform exists, because until we start to actually tell the story of your achievements and the achievements of African immigrants, our names may largely be forgotten and our achievements may be swept under the rug. So I want us to really own the fact that you've done something really big here, and I don't want to downplay it. I don't want to play it small. Dr. Uzoh, your name is etched in the history stones. You have done something huge. Yes, there was a whole lot of team effort. Yes, there was a huge collaboration. But even the IBM papers published acknowledged that you are the architect of the Interconnect. So I want to set the record straight.
My parents are very, very smart, but they're very low-key. They don't make that much noise. So I inherited that from my family. We don't make big noise. People have played with copper interconnect for a very long time, but it is coming out a viable solution. The solution that I developed was far cheaper than what it replaced, about more than 10 times, sometimes more reliable. That's very unusual to come up with something that's cheaper and far more reliable and highly scalable. That technology was actually developed in around 92 and went to manufacture in 97. And up to today, it's still being used practically in all the devices, from your cell phone, laptop, supercomputer, data centers. It's everywhere. It's very pervasive, even from the watches, the Apple Watch, the Samsung Watch. It's everywhere. The challenge, let me mention briefly, you know what the size of, you have an idea what a millimeter is, correct? Imagine dividing 1 millimeter into 1,000 times. That's 1 micron. Imagine 30,000 times. That's 0.3 micron. So those are the width of the lines that need to be filled. They're extremely fine. These are the lines that carry signals to the transistors. So nobody have done that before. And I developed a process that was basically defect-free. That is what made it scalable. So for over 25 years, it's still used in the industry. And there's a lot of effort to replace it, but it will be difficult because of it's very cheap to do. Also, you mentioned that I have about 300 patents in the early introduction. Yes, you are correct. The actual number is about 408 in the US. It's more than 300 or more than 350. And apart from copper, I've worked on other areas which we'll get into in my present company, it's actually very important in industry. And many of the technologies our company, ADA, is working on is in the roadmap of all the big semiconductor companies. And all the big boys, Samsung, Hynix, Micron, Toshiba, they've licensed technologies that we developed in our company and called hybrid bonding, which is using your cell phone and advanced microprocessors and graphics chips. We'll come into that later if there's time. So, but it's still all copper, all related to copper, and how chips are stacked. We take this for granted that you can have very, very big memory, high bandwidth memory, where the dice are stacked over one another and they're connected with copper. So, but all of those rest on the fundamental of my original work.
I think the next part of this story is very jarring because, you're able to solve this 30-year-old problem with copper, right? And then, you started to present your findings at global conferences. And you mentioned to me that you noticed that people were visibly shocked to see that the person behind this breakthrough was a Black man. You told me that people were expecting to see a white face for a discovery of this magnitude. What was that experience like and how did you react to it?
When they initially announced my name, Cyprian Uzoh, when I came out of the curtain, people were actually shocked, that it's a Black guy. But what was more embarrassing was after my presentation, people said, "We don't believe you did all this work. You're too young to have accomplished so much." Then it occurred to me, maybe because when it says Cyprian, Italians answer Cyprian or Spanish folks, and Japanese answer Uzoh, UZO. And so if you put two of them together, it's not obvious that I'm from Nigeria. After that, I said, all my work will include my middle name. So if you look at all my earlier patents and papers, they have Cyprian Uzoh or C. Uzoh. After that, it becomes C. Uzoh, Cyprian Emeka Uzoh. It was that awakening that I said, I don't want this to happen again, so they can know ahead of time.
I saw something really funny in one of your IBM publications. It says, Uzoh, whose name in Igbo means copper, so it's only fitting that you came up with a copper solution. But Uzoh means way or road, so please tell me something I'm missing there.
Actually, you did your homework. Thank you. Actually, copper in chemistry stands for Cu, That's nomenclature for copper, Cu. And my initials actually Cu, Cyprian Uzoh. So,
wow.
There's something mysterious about that I can't explain.
Oh my God. It feels like it was written in the stars, Dr. Cyprian Uzoh, for you to have invented this. I mean, that is genius. Look at that.
Yeah. It's my initials are Cu for a long time. Cyprian Uzoh, Cu, and then copper is Cu. When you say copper, is set for Cu. So it's one of those great coincidences difficult to explain.
So after years of all that immigration bottleneck, you wanted to be in aviation, but that couldn't happen because you weren't a citizen, government rules and all of that. Eventually, you became a citizen. Do you remember the specific day you finally took the oath?
Actually, I had earned the green card for a very, very long time because I was hoping someday I'll go back to Nigeria. What happened was, with my colleagues, we said Canada. Toronto, there was a company that started up that came out of University of Toronto. It was a very great company. We went for due diligence to see if it's a company we will acquire. So at the Toronto airport, when I went to immigration, I had Nigerian passport and it became a big issue. They said, you're from Nigeria, you are looking for a job. Which company hires you? Where are you going? Which hotel? All my colleagues have already passed in front of me. They kept saying, which company do you work for? What does the company do? What type of questions kept coming up? And then my colleagues have to say, he's one of us. We're going to invest in Toronto. After that, the young man, immigration officer, allowed me to get into Canada. I felt humiliated. So after that, I went and fight for my citizenship. So it was that Toronto experience that was basically pulled aside because I had Nigerian passports. I have to go through all this unnecessary integration while my American colleagues just, walked over. So that was the key motivation. And that happened when I was in California, maybe 25 years ago. No, maybe it's about 20 years ago or so. Less than 20 years ago, became a citizen.
How have things changed since you got your citizenship in terms of travel opportunities, in terms of, getting jobs that are exclusive to American citizens? How has the citizenship opened doors for you in new ways?
Actually, in the case of airport, I just go to like regular Americans, nothing happens. And then for a long time, I have not been looking for a job. Usually, my present job, I was invited by a colleague, he come and join us. So maybe in the future, I may be looking for a job, but for now, I'm not in the job market.
The job looks for you at this stage. And right now you're 74?
Yes.
You're not slowing down still, right? You currently work for IDEA as a distinguished engineer, a huge feat, I must add. Congratulations, Dr. Uzoh. Now, while many people are long retired at your age, you're still out there patenting new ideas. What's the secret to keeping your mind as sharp?
I'm somebody who is solution-oriented. If something comes up, we try to see how can we solve this? How can we make it better? Sometimes it's abstract. Sometimes it's something very practical that we deal with day to day.
In November 2025, your journey came full circle. Your alma mater, University of Wisconsin-Madison, presented you with their Distinguished Achievements Award.
It was hilarious. I was very happy. And I said, oh, thank God, they remembered my work. But quite often, those type of exceptional things usually go to CEO people who are executives who fund big programs in university. And here's a scientist or an engineer who worked very hard, to develop transformation technologies with his colleagues and my other friends that I'm being honored. It was very special.
Dr. Uzoh, you're also very passionate about giving back. You visit Nigeria often. You host Nigerian students who come to the US for science competitions. You give them a tour of your lab. You host them in your home. And you told me in our 2018 interview about the need to invest in kids from the primary school or the pre-K level. So what drives you so much, to give back to young people at home?
It's important to invest in our young children because the earlier, the better. By the time they're in high school, it's getting late. It's basically, I believe, if we invest early enough, we can teach children how to look at things differently. And I don't know about you, in my days in school, I believe my teachers have all the answers, and that. But for me, and we were never taught that we could create, that we could invent, that everything that is known has been written in textbooks, Of course, it's the opposite. So I believe if you can get the children very early, where they are very creative and open a world of possibilities to them, I think it's going to transform our life in Nigeria.
And when you look at the Nigerian context, what problems do you believe Nigerian engineers should be solving next? And do you think we have the tools, the facilities for them to make it happen?
When I visited Nigeria, even from here, we have a major shortcoming. We don't have enough energy. Electricity is a big issue. Water supply, like water supply is a big issue. We have so many fundamental issues, but we have capable young men and women who could address these issues if they are guided. And of course, it also needs funding, serious funding. Of course, our universities, I've visited some universities which I will not name. I find their labs very embarrassing compared to their counterpart in the US. Very, very embarrassing. I think the government have to invest in education more than they are now. And of course, the teachers are poorly paid.
Wow.
If you visited where I went to school in Shagamu, teacher probably paid less than 50,000 naira a month. I mean, what can you do with 50,000 naira? Also in my town in Nojoto, in grade school teachers, they make that less. So I don't think our government took education that seriously.
That's unfortunate. And maybe it's the lack of funds you've mentioned, but the Nigerian education system is often criticized for being too theoretical. Lots of cramming, lots of memorizing, not enough practicals. So if you could take one element of the American education system, maybe it's the way they teach or it's the way they fund their research, and basically swap it or transplant it into Nigeria, what would it be? What's the missing ingredients that would turn more Nigerian students into world-class inventors like yourself?
For me, I believe one of the reasons why I have done well was because I cannot cram. When I was in high school, I was penalized heavily for it, even in primary school. Then when I came to class 5, there was so much material to cover. Then cramming becomes useless. People like me came to the top. So maybe we'll look at things and synthesize new knowledge. So if kids can be taught to describe concepts, you read a book, you close the book, what did you learn, in your own words. I think it's that fundamental, but in your own words, then you can teach somebody in your own words. Then you can combine it with other aspects in your own words. That's where the creativity comes in. It's like a good artist or musician. Of course, I believe rote work can still be helpful, but if you look at all the top performers, it's beyond rote work. You have to be able to understand things at a fundamental level and then stitch them together differently to form new patterns. This is, of course, I'm not in Nigeria. I don't know enough about Nigerian educational system. But quite often, over here, professors, they do research. Paper publication, it's very vital for development, but for it to be useful, it has to be scaled up. What you do in the lab, get a good result. When you go to manufacture, a totally different concept, a totally different machinery. I think this is one of the issues that need to be developed. That what you do in the lab. Imagine you're cooking for 5 people, correct? Or 10 people in your house. You use, your pot, your spoons. Only you're cooking for 1,000. You're not going to use the same type of pot. Imagine you're cooking for 10,000 people. You're not going to turn 10,000 soup with hand. It has to be machinery, correct? It's that type of scaling. That is what makes products very, very cheap, because they can be scaled up on very, very high productivity. That reduces the cost dramatically. So everything we keep talking about scaling. That's basically what I'm implying. I think it's not emphasized enough at home.
But you're doing your best, helping students and, like I mentioned, giving back. So can we talk a bit about some of your projects, giving back to Nigeria, your efforts with the Red Cross and all of that? Can you share more about that?
Somebody in our community, I was watching a video. Somebody fell down, during an event, and people were surrounded him, and they kept praying for him in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name. Then a few days later, I asked what happened to that man. They said, of course he died. And I felt very bad. If somebody have assisted in maybe first aid, maybe CPR, whatever, the outcome may have been different. So I felt because of this, because of that, with the collaboration of Digwe Mbamalo of our town and my other colleagues in Nigeria, I founded a program to bring in Red Cross to come and teach folks in grade school and high school, fundamentals of Red Cross and basic life skills, so that there's this type of accident, they know what to do. At least they know how to tie tourniquet to reduce bleeding, CPR, If somebody's choking, they know what to do as opposed to, praying.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing back home. We really appreciate that. So for the young immigrants or the young Nigerian or Ethiopian or Ghanaian back on the continent, what would you want them to understand about success based on your life experiences?
There's no replacement for hard work. No replacement for you have to work very hard. You have to stay at it. And it's okay to fail. I failed many, many times, but it's what you do. I learned quickly from my mistakes, and the next time I don't make the same mistake. And because I failed, I learned from my mistakes. I know how to take the shortcuts. Without those mistakes, I would not have learned all those shortcuts. And that basically enabled additional inventions in my work. So my failure led to most of my inventions. So when things are not going well, don't give up. Work on it. Eventually find a better solution. Then even if you solve it, see if you can improve on the new solution. That's what I have to say to encourage them. Don't ever give up.
We've talked a lot about your 350 plus. You corrected me that it was about 400 patents and the ways they changed the world of technology. But family is also important to you. You have a wife, you have 3 daughters who are thriving, graduates from MIT, the most prestigious technical institution on the planet. Now, let's talk about your family patent. How does that make you feel? Especially knowing that your A-Force legacy is now being carried forward by 3 brilliant daughters and you have grandkids now.
Yes, I do have a grandson. They've done well on their own, but I have to tell you, they worked their butts off. It's not easy. To be admitted into Harvard or MIT, even business school, Kellogg, they did not rest on, my father is this. No, I don't believe in that. Actually, they worked very hard. So they deserve any of their colleagues. They work their butts off. They're good students. They're very successful in their own ways. But they have to compete, against the very best, correct, in the world. And so I'm very proud of them.
Finally, how would you say it's been like training American kids in Nigerian values? How's that transition been like in a new country, making sure that, they're still connected to their roots from home?
I think it comes from example. If you show good examples, when my father visited with us, our in-laws, or when they lived with us, they say how we treat them, how we interact with each other, and how we interact with our Nigerian friends and family members back at home. So I think those examples, they lean more on those examples as opposed to what I say. Correct. They watch your actions. I think the actions means a lot more, in my opinion, than what you say. Of course, Nigerian food, we eat Nigerian. They prefer Nigerian food, but they're free to eat whatever they want to. I don't impose, but I still like my Nigerian food.
Dr. Uzoh, the Nigerian community is incredibly proud of you. We're proud of your research. We're proud of your resilience. We're proud of your excellence. And it's been an honor having you on the A-Force podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Annette. I believe 7 or 8 years ago, we met for the first time, correct?
Yes.
In Lagos. And who we believe we'll meet in Berkeley.
Yes.
Well, the rest is history. Keep up the good work. We're very proud of you too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This has been the A-Force podcast with Dr. Cyprian Emeka Uzoh, Nigerian engineer, inventor, NASA fellow, one of the brightest minds behind the technology that powers our world today. If this conversation inspired you, please share it and leave a comment. Follow us on social media at the A-Force podcast. And I will see you on the next episode with another immigrant who's breaking the glass ceiling. Bye.
This is the A-Force podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.